March 26, 1875. It has been 10 days since the British capture of Pasir Salak, and it seemed, for a brief moment, that the tide had finally turned, and that British authority in Perak would soon be restored in full. But events in 1870s Malaya were rarely that predictable. A new crisis would soon erupt, one that no one in Perak had anticipated. And this time, the shock did not come from Maharaja Lela or the rebel chiefs upriver, but from a small and turbulent Malay state 200 miles to the south, Sungai Ujong. It is here, far from the smouldering remains of Pasir Salak, that the next chapter of this war unexpectedly opened. And the single spark that would ignite this confrontation would be a map maker. Sungai Ujong, the central part of which is today the modern city of Seremban, was one of the original 9 component states that formed the Minangkabau Confederacy, or Negeri Sembilan. The state was considered a very prosperous tin mining district, but in the 1870s, it was racked by division and instability. As in Perak and Selangor, these conflicts were fueled by succession disputes among its rulers, as well as rivalries over rich tin mines and their lucrative trade. And, as in Perak and Selangor, these rivalries prompted the direct intervention of the British, who supported one faction over the other. Sungai Ujong was governed by 2 main figures: the Dato Klana, or chief of the land, and the Dato Shahbandar, or chief of the water. The Dato Klana was traditionally the land or chief ruler. Dato Klana Said Abdul Rahman bin Said Ahmad Al-Qadri had sought the help of the British in securing the tin trade along the Sungai River. For years, illegal tax gatherers had constantly interrupted trade on the Sungai, the key highway from the tin mines. Control of this river was central to his power, and he turned to the British, requesting a British resident to maintain order and administer the collection of taxes and duties along this crucial tin artery. The Dato Shahbandar, on the other hand, was the water chief who was supposed to rule the ports and rivers, including the right to collect taxes and duties along the Sungai River. Because of this, Dato Shahbandar Kulub Tunggal, or Abdullah bin Ahmad, was far wealthier than the Dato Klana and regarded himself as virtually an independent ruler. He did not submit to the Dato Klana's authority, refusing to sign the agreement that would establish the Dato Klana as the head of the state. He also strongly opposed the Dato Klana's alliance with the British, maintaining that the affairs of Sungai Ujong were of no concern to the white man. He even gave refuge to Raja Mahmud of Selangor, the infamous Malay warrior who had fought another British ally, the Viceroy of Selangor, Tunku Kudin. Raja Mahmud was known for his fierce reputation and reportedly boasted in later years of having personally killed 200 men. When he was driven out of Selangor in August 1874, the Dato Shahbandar welcomed the arrival of such a fearsome warrior in his ranks and appointed Raja Mahmud as his Panglima Perang, or warlord. The Dato Shahbandar began preparing for war, gathering fighting men and building stockades in Kepayang, Rasah and Rahang. In response, the Dato Klana mustered his own army of 400 men, arming them with modern breech-loading rifles and a German Krupp artillery piece. He even had an elite guard of 40 Arab and Egyptian mercenaries recruited from Singapore. On November 16, 1874, he captured Rasah and Rahang, whose commander, Datuk Serampu, feared the Dato Klana's Arab guard. The next day, he attacked the Dato Shahbandar's stronghold of Kepayang. However, his defenders were personally led by Raja Mahmud himself, and his fearsome reputation caused such terror that the Dato Klana's men fled the field as soon as Raja Mahmud appeared, throwing away their new rifles and abandoning their Krupp gun to the enemy. Desperate, the Dato Klana appealed to the British for help, and on November 26, this help arrived at Lukhut in the form of a 21-gun Royal Navy corvette, HMS Charybdis, bringing with it 55 officers and men of the 10th Regiment of Foot, 45 Blue Jackets, 22 Marines, 20 men of the Royal Artillery, and 50 policemen. They brought with them naval rocket tubes and a 7-pounder mountain gun. The force reached Kepayang at 6 in the evening on November 6 and was immediately fired upon by the stockade there. The British pounded the stockade with rocket fire and exchanged rifle volleys with its defenders for about half an hour before darkness forced them to withdraw. When the assault resumed 2 days later, to their great surprise, the British found the stockade deserted and abandoned. Following this military show of force in support of the Dato Klana, the Dato Shahbandar and Raja Mahmud fled to Selangor, fugitives in their own land. Failing to receive any support from the Sultan of Selangor, they eventually went to Singapore and surrendered themselves unconditionally to the British authorities on December 19, 1874. The British subsequently provided the Dato Shahbandar with a house in Singapore and an allowance from the government, while Raja Mahmud settled in Singapore on a pension after a period of exile in Johor. In October 1875, he met with Frank Swettenham, and they became such fast friends that Raja Mahmud accompanied him to Perak on October 26, less than a week before the murder of the British resident at Pasir Salak triggered the Perak War. News of the murder of Mr. Birch and the defeat of the British in their subsequent attack on Kampung Biak may have had a profound impact on events in Sungai Ujong. The presence of British troops in the state and the increased importance of the Dato Klana were resented by the neighbouring chiefs, particularly Tengku Antah, the acknowledged claimant to the office of Yam Tuan Besar, or head of the Minangkabau Confederacy. While Yam Tuan Antah took no part in the struggle in Sungai Ujong in 1874, his sympathies were with the Dato Shahbandar. Yam Tuan Antah had felt insulted that the Dato Klana had entered into a separate treaty with the British as an independent ruler. Events in Perak strengthened the belief that the British could be successfully resisted or even driven out, and Yam Tuan Antah decided to act. Yam Tuan Antah removed the penghulu of Tarachi appointed by the Dato Klana and installed one of his own men, gathering an armed force there with the intention of building stockades. Receiving reports of the armed gathering, Captain Patrick Murray, the acting assistant resident in Sungai Ujong, led a reconnaissance party to Tarachi to investigate on November 26. The force consisted of 20 men of the 1st Battalion of the 10th Regiment and 30 policemen. Not expecting any serious resistance, the troops marched in light order, each man carrying only 20 rounds of ammunition and 2 days' rations. Accompanying the party was Dominick Daniel Daly, a British surveyor and cartographer tasked with conducting a survey of the Tarachi Valley and Rembau. When they reached Tarachi, they found everything quiet and the penghulu missing. They camped there for the night. Finding no hostile forces there, Murray and the main party headed back towards Rasa the following morning, November 27th. However, Mr. Daly was keen to push on with his surveying work towards Kuala Pilah and decided to proceed alone with 6 policemen as an escort. Daly's party had moved only about half a mile before they encountered an ominous obstacle. The path, which ran along raised strips dividing the paddy fields, had been spiked with sharp stakes or ranjau. Forced off the trail, they then proceeded to wade slowly through the mud and water of the paddy fields. While exposed in the open paddy fields, Daly's small group was spotted. About 200 armed Malays suddenly appeared on the opposite embankment and immediately pointed their muskets and rifles at the surveyor's party. They threatened Daly, saying that they were going to cut off the head of the Dato Klana's son for bringing the white man to their country. They demanded to know Daly's business in their country and threatened to shoot if they advanced any further, shouting, "Balik, balik, go back." Panicking, Daly sent a messenger to Captain Murray and the main party, who were already a mile and a half down the road returning towards Rasa. The main British force instantly turned around and quickly marched back towards Tarachi. Upon seeing the British troops approaching, the assembled Malays raised a shout and fired at them, the opening shots of the Sungai Ujong War. Murray and the commander of the troops, Lieutenant Hinksman, found themselves in a terrible tactical position. The jungle was thick, and the narrow path allowed them to deploy a forward firing line of no more than 10 men. The Malays, on the other hand, were widely deployed, firing from a strong position, concealed by a high earth embankment, protected by ranjau stakes, deep paddy fields behind this, and impenetrable jungle safeguarding their flank. The Malays and British exchanged fire for about 20 minutes when Hinksman realized that his troops were beginning to run out of ammunition for their Martini Henry rifles. Some men reported having only 3 rounds left. He also received reports that the Malays were attempting a flanking movement through the jungle to cut off his only line of retreat. Short of ammunition and in danger of being surrounded, Hinksman ordered a retreat back to their barracks at Rasa. The force marched back to the British boats on the Sungei River, covered approximately 2 miles through the intense afternoon sun and thick steamy jungle. It was 1.5 hours before they reached the safety of Rasa, thoroughly exhausted. The Malays, on the other hand, were buoyed by the sight of retreating British troops and continued their pursuit deep into Sungai Ujong territory. They were soon joined by a force led by Yam Tuan Antah himself, numbering an estimated 800 to 4,000 men. On the night of December 2nd, the Malays descended upon Paroi and attacked the police station there. The 8 policemen manning the station fled for their lives, and the Malays put the building to the torch. They occupied some large Chinese coolie houses in Paroi and began building defensive stockades all around the village. Yam Tuan Antah confirmed his hostile intent by sending an angry letter to Captain Murray, saying that previous British calls for friendly relations were only made with the tongue and not from the heart. He questioned the legitimacy of the British residents' authority and demanded that respect be shown to him in future. He ended the letter with a warning. What is past, let it pass, but do not let it happen again. He concluded, warning Murray to keep out of Tarachi. The Malays continued to strengthen their stockades at Paroi and were now only 5 miles from the British residency. The residency was situated on the ridge above what is now Jalan Datuk Siamang Gagap in Seremban, while the Dato Klana's house was in Ampangan, just where the ridge runs down to the Sungei River. The standing garrison of the residency numbered only 50 men of the 1st Battalion of the 10th Regiment under Lieutenant Hicksman, though they were joined the next day by 20 men of the same regiment under Lieutenant Peyton, rushed from Malacca. There were also about 40 policemen. They were based at Rasa, about 2 miles from the residency. Ammunition was low, at about 80 rounds left per man. The Dato Klana's own fighting men seemed to have disappeared, and he could only muster a few of his Arab guard to protect his house. Murray sent urgent messages to Singapore, warning of a general rising of the Malays in Sungai Ujong, fearing an imminent attack on the residency, and pleading for reinforcements. The governor of the Straits Settlements, William Jevois, regarded the letter from Yam Tuan Antah as nothing less than a declaration of war against the British government. However, he was now in a very complicated situation. How could he reinforce his forces in Sungai Ujong without jeopardizing the success of a delicate pincer movement he was now conducting 200 miles to the north in Perak to occupy Kinta and Kuala Kangsar? The fall of the British residency in Sungai Ujong to the Malays would certainly be a catastrophe not unlike Bircher's killing. It would not only mean the loss of their control over the state, but could also encourage the rebels in the ongoing outbreak in Perak and foster opposition to the British elsewhere in the Malay Peninsula. Caught between these twin crises, Perak to the north and Sungai Ujong to the south, the stakes were clear. If Sungai Ujong falls, Perak too could unravel. The governor had no choice. He had to save the Sungai Ujong residency from destruction. In our next episode, we follow the unfolding drama in Sungai Ujong as the British scramble to hold on to their fragile foothold, and Yam Tuan Antah rallies his men for the coming battle. A confrontation that would test the resolve of both sides to the very brink. Join me next time as we step into the continuing drama of the war in Sungai Ujong. Until then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do consider giving it a like, sharing it with your family and friends, leaving your thoughts in the comments below, or subscribing to join me on future adventures exploring the lost chronicles of Malayan history. You can also help support the channel by going to the Malayan Chronicles Patreon site and joining as a guardian of the chronicles. Until the next episode, I remain as ever your grateful chronicler. Cheerio.